traditional thought is like, well, let's squirrel all those acorns away and keep squirreling them and catch up contributions and, but then you look at life and you look at life expectancy and longevity and happiness and you're like, well, what if I want to get a cup of coffee when I'm 62? Welcome, Christine, to the Land and Everything Else podcast. I'm so happy to have you.
Craig, it is really great to be here. I love what you're doing on the show, and I'm an Illinois grad.
I know, ILL, and I love every second about it. So today we're shooting from downtown Chicago, and so just our guests know that if there's a siren or something exciting happening, we're going to power through, but we are in the city. So Christine, thank you so much for being here today. I would love to talk about your book today on Land and Everything Else. Walk me through this amazing book of conversations with experts, and what was the, How to Retire is the name of the book, and what was the motivation behind getting that started?
Well, I do a podcast myself, and I've just been spending a lot of time over the past decade or so focusing on retirement planning, retirement decumulation, and so had built up this amazing network of people who I think are true thought leaders in a lot of different aspects of retirement planning. And one thing I've realized as I've been working on the whole topic is that it's less than 50% financial. In fact, I think Michael Finke put it in the book, this is not a math problem. Like, yes, there are some math things that you need to get your arms around when trying to decide whether and when to retire, but there are a whole set of other considerations that you need to be thinking about, like where you live, what your relationships are like, what you do to replace that identity you had while you were working. So those are the things that I wanted to bring together, and I wanted to mine that great group of people and all the information and knowledge that they have to share, and wisdom, actually.
That's my big takeaway. I had the luxury of reading it early. Oh my gosh, I felt very VIP in that moment. And some things that stuck out to me as conversations that I think are important to any consumer and advisor too. The first that really stuck out to me was this conversation around aging in place and home equity, and that chapter that kind of said, Americans have home equity, right? And they've got this home equity. But is aging in place always a great idea? Differences in aging in place safely and not safely. And, if you could expound a bit on that chapter, I thought that was just so important for everybody to read, like, early on.
Yeah, thank you. That was Mark Miller. He was my subject matter expert in that area. And Mark writes for Morningstar.com. He also writes for the New York Times and a couple of other outlets. But that's one of his beats, is housing for older adults. And so we explored all the different dimensions of that. Mark's point is that aging in place doesn't need to be as literal as so many older adults take it. It doesn't have to be that old, 4 or 5 bedroom house where you raised your kids. Like, you might have a lot of sentimental value in that home, but the thing that you really probably value about your place is probably your neighbors, your friends, maybe your healthcare providers. That gets more important as people age. So your cultural activities and affinities. So that was something we explored in depth in the book, is just don't think exclusively about your tax rate, for example. Right. Think about all of the other dimensions of this. And by the way, if you do downsize your home, you may be able to unlock some if you are a homeowner.
Well, and I thought that was pretty interesting to me. There was I don't know, I found that chapter particularly poignant, and I think it's because I went through that with my dad a few years ago, so it's top of mind. Yeah. But he stuck around his house 5 years longer than he needed to, right? And so when I was reading that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is Bill, this is Bill, this is Bill, right? But there was a one part in there that I thought was really interesting. It's like, yeah, you could age in place, but can you get a wheelchair through the front door? And that to me was one of those things of like, how wide's the front door and are there stairs? And I was immediately like, oh, and I think to the conversation that you've written about and with Michael Finke, it's kind of like, and Jamie too, I think was one about, we don't want to have to make all these decisions in our 70s. Maybe we can make them earlier.
Right.
I wonder if you could share a little bit about that theme through the book, about let's think before,
right,
which is kind of innovative. People don't do that.
No, they don't. And it's human nature not to. I think, we have a tendency when we're 65, we're probably at the healthiest point we may be for the rest of our lives. And so I think there is a natural human tendency, whatever life, whether you're retired or not, you want to assume that it will ever be thus. And you don't necessarily want to look forward. But I think Michael Finke made the point that you don't necessarily want your kids making these decisions for you. And
that's a great point there.
Yeah. And Mark Miller made the point that if you can kind of get ahead of some of this decision making, you probably will make it easier on yourself. It's never going to get easier to move as it is today, right?
Yeah, that's a really great way to think. Like today me, it's much easier to move than 80-year-old me.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
I love that and you saw that theme just woven through the book of like, you're empowered to make decisions now. And I think that's, to me, one of the big takeaways of the book was that. Is like, I can make decisions at 60. I don't have to wait until I break a hip. I don't have to wait until I have to. Like, I don't know. That was really empowering for me.
Yeah, no, I loved that. And I loved the conversation with Mark and with others about the value of community and how people, sometimes it is very difficult to move from a home to, say, a condo building or even some sort of independent living facility. That transition, of course, is very hard and very emotionally difficult. But what the research shows is that people older in life who have moved into some sort of community setting often have higher levels of happiness because there is that built-in social contact that you have by seeing, neighbors in the hallway and people in that same sort of community setting.
And I loved the conversation in the book, and please remind me of the collaborator on this one. But it was about circles of closeness and contact, right? It was a little bit about how many people are in your inner circle and outer circle. One of the things in financial planning, I think, is we worry so much about, okay, can I retire? What asset allocation should I have? What cash flow? Here's my pretty spreadsheet, But do we think about inner circles and communities? And I don't know. I really found that to be poignant as well.
That's one of my favorite chapters of the book. It's a discussion with Laura Karstensen, who heads up the Stanford Center on Longevity.
So good.
She talks about how our social circles tend to change as we age, and they actually do get smaller in some cases for sad reasons. People die, they might move away, but a lot of that is kind of self-selected winnowing that we might cast off. I think she calls them peripheral others, and the example she gives is like your kids, friends, parents, who they're maybe perfectly fine part of your social network, and maybe they will stay part of your social network, but people like that, not in the true inner circle. And so we might have these networks that are as small as like 4 or 5 people who are very, very close. And those sorts of relationships are everything. And I think we all have people like that in our lives where you come away and you're walking on air because you feel so understood. You feel like you have just understood someone very completely. And so her point is that you'll see changes in your social network, and it's okay. And don't be worried about your social network getting smaller.
And I thought it was also interesting just about like happiness that goes along with that. And I've read also where men tend to suffer a bit, widowed men, that their best friend was their spouse, right? And that was kind of the key to the network. Exactly. And now that key is gone.
Exactly.
And then we find more depression and sadness and some bad outcomes there.
Yeah, for sure. And another issue related to men, and this came up in a few chapters, is how men tend to have more social engagement from their work than women. Women might have certainly a network at work of friends, but they might also have other moms or other people in their yoga group or whatever. You pick up friends all over the place as a
Right.
woman. And I think some guys, and of course this is a huge generalization,
Well, I don't think
might
you're
not.
wrong.
So the point is for men to be preemptive,
Yeah.
know that, well, if my main lunch buddies were all people I work with, what are you going to do to replace those
I tell you,
things?
I made a couple of guy friends over COVID, and that was hard to do. Men in their 40s, like we both have lives, but now my buddy Dave and I are like real close. And
Yeah.
but it's not easy.
You've got to
It's
put
just-
yourself out there, right?
You do, you
Yeah.
do, and so that was different. I think I'd like to talk with you a little bit about another kind of theme I saw as I read through was this idea that I think Jamie talked about it, Michael talked about it, like what's life gonna look like? I think Jamie had a really good point in there. He's like, all right, you love golfing, you want to travel to see your kids. That's 2 days. You got 363
Right.
left, right? Like that's stuck in my head. And I started thinking about that as like planning and mapping out retirement before you're there. And then if you don't mind sharing a little more, because I know it was in a different chapter, but we're so much, we get this serotonin rush about who we are at work. Like right now, right?
Mhm.
I'm having so much fun. Like I'm with you and I'm with this awesome team and we're having a great day. It's going to be such a fun day, and I'm going to get a big high out of that. So one day when that stops, the high goes away. Like if you would share a little bit, that constant theme of like who we are at work and then that transition, that's a toughie.
Jamie, going back to the thing of like populating a calendar and like,
liked
okay, you've got
that.
2 days there. I thought his very concrete point was like actually look at a calendar
Yeah.
and try to plot out your days. So your workout is from 8 to 10, whatever it is, but just look at how you're going to fill your days. Because I think there sometimes is a tendency among older adults. It's like the less you have to do, the more you focus on them, like on the few things that you have scheduled. So I think the calendar exercise is a really
I do
good
too.
thing for people to pursue. In terms of that sort of loss of identity, loss of, sort of purpose that some people might have, one key takeaway for me from all of these conversations is, can you find that kernel or kernels of really joy and purpose that your work brought you? Can you try to keep some of that going in some fashion? So maybe you don't need the money, but you're working in some charitable capacity. So separately, I had a conversation with Scott Burns, who was a retirement writer for many years, and still is, by the way. And he
That
made
name's
the
familiar.
point to me
Okay.
that he said, my highest, best use in the world is probably not stocking shelves in the food pantry. It's probably continuing to do the work that I did when I was a syndicated columnist for all of those years, because he felt like he's educating people, he's getting feedback from people on his work. So he knew that he wanted to continue to write in some fashion and to educate. So I think that we can all, in the years leading up to retirement, can you take a step back and think about, if you had a really great day, what were the aspects of that day that perhaps you could capture even after you're retired, doing something, consulting with people or helping young people start businesses or whatever is related and was the best, most fun and exciting part of your job. Try to think about carrying that forward, because Laura Karstensen made the point in the book. She was like, work is good for us, but the way we go about work in this country is all wrong. We approach it way too intensely. We burn ourselves out. Can we continue to work longer if we're
Happy.
not killing ourselves? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think to some extent, anecdotally, when you look at academia and you see people still working in their 70s, I think there's something to that.
Me too.
That there is a certain joy, an ability to continue doing the job, and those things. I think I look around my peers and I'm like, oh, that person loves doing what they do. They're still doing it, right?
I'd love to see that.
And it's not necessarily the case if you're a West Texas oil worker, right? Whose body physically gets beaten down and then you can't. But I want to pivot just a minute to the investment part, because I saw a common thread there as well. And I liked it. It was neat. I think the common thread was kind of keep it simple.
Yeah.
Like the investment piece really isn't the crux of this conversation. It's not really the crux of retirement, right? That we're generating income, and as Wade said, some of that income is going to be in this kind of guaranteed pool, and some may be more variable as far as income goes. But then other chapters, it's kind of like, well, there's equity, stocks, and some cash. You're going to be okay, And so share with me a little bit, the thread of investing through this. What were some of the big takeaways that you had, and your thoughts too around that?
Yeah, I am a big believer in keeping things simple. I try to evangelize about that point in my own work, and I'm glad to hear that it came through.
It did
in the book,
in a good way.
The people I wanted to reach out to: Bill Bernstein, J.L. Collins, and Wade. Obviously, his work on the importance of enlarging guaranteed income. That you should really be thoughtful about what you're doing there, and that in turn can inform how you structure the actual investment portfolio once you have tried to enlarge your current income. I really wanted to have Wade in the book to discuss this idea of how we're all wired a little bit differently in terms of what we want. Because I'm someone who's always worked in the context of an employer. I've always had a paycheck. I kind of want something that feels like that when I'm retired. So even though someone like Bill Bernstein or J.L. Collins would shudder at the idea of buying some sort of an annuity product, I actually think that for me and my husband, as a kind of starting point when we think about our cash flows in retirement, we just want to have a baseline of cash flows coming in through Social Security and annuity. But other people may feel completely differently, and they might just want control of their investment portfolio.
But at the same time, even those strategies that were different, you had one proponent of tips, right? Was
Bill Bernstein.
Like, just let's do tips. If you want security and inflation protection, you got Social Security and you got tips. Right. And there's really not much private market out there anymore that does the inflation adjustments.
Exactly.
And so he's just buy tips. It's expensive, but then you don't have to worry about it anymore.
Exactly.
Right? There's something, I don't know, it got me thinking a little bit about the complexity of it. We've talked on our podcast before about rental properties and real estate, and then you kind of do get to a point age-wise though, where that's not as fun, right? The calls, the dealing with it, the emergencies, the weird litigation over your head. Like there's something about reading that kind of gets me to, there's lots of ways to build wealth in America, and there's lots of perspectives, and there's lots of different types of investments. But when you get to be in your 70s and 80s, is the headache worth that? I don't know.
Yeah, I am not an expert in that area.
It kind of brought me back to thinking like it's not.
Right.
And that's what I really loved about the investment themes was one of, okay, like make it easy on yourself. Like don't make this hard. Annuitization, Michael Finke says a lot, gives you the permission to spend.
Exactly.
Right? That's the beauty of annuitization. This month I'm going to get $5,000. Next month I'm going to get $5,000. I can spend the $5,000.
Or give it away.
Or give it away, right? So I thought that was really interesting, and simplicity. I like that.
Well, also, one thing I think about, because I had parents who experienced cognitive decline, if you can line things up and make them simple, and annuity is a perfect example in this instance, you are reducing your vulnerability as you age.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
I like that too. There's so much to this. It goes back to our earlier conversation. Making decisions earlier for yourself later empowers and protects you.
Exactly.
And I love that. So what did you get out of this journey for your personal retirement? What did you take away and say, I'm going to do that? I love this. Changing my stars a little.
Yeah. I would say that point about trying to find aspects of my work to carry forward later in life is probably one of my key takeaways from all of these conversations. I had a conversation with Carl Richards several years ago, but he he said to start making a stop doing list of things that you do not enjoy.
Oh, I love that.
And kind of cataloging those And then
I love that.
it's sort of like mastering the art of subtraction. I think Jordan Grummett talked a little bit about that in the last chapter of the book too. But are there things that you just will happily walk away from, some of which you get pretty good at? You know, that you may be like the person in your firm who is good at X thing, but you see it on your calendar and you're like, So try to take note of those. Take note of the things that you really love when you had a great day. Take note of those things. So for me, you know, I think about this book project, like something like this was really fun. And one thing I loved about it was just the networking aspect of it.
Sure.
Like hey, I know all these amazing people. How do I even pick? Where do I even start?
Right. Sure.
And so I think I want to try to carry some of that energy forward, but it's definitely provided a lot of good food for thought about my retirement.
Mine too. Mine's not anytime soon, but I think my big takeaway, there was a comment in there. I think it was, I don't remember which chapter, but the comment was this idea of decreasing saving as you get a little closer to retirement, so that you learn to spend.
Yeah.
That's a neat idea, right? Yeah. I had never really considered that. I think traditional thought, and even in the financial planning community, traditional thought is like, well, let's squirrel all those acorns away and keep squirreling them and catch up contributions, and, you know, but then you look at life and you look at life expectancy and longevity and happiness, and you're like, well, what if I want to get a cup of coffee when I'm 62? Like, what if I want to get a mocha? What if I want to
upgrade it to the $7
coffee? What if I want to
go
on a cruise? Like,
right.
What if I want to enjoy that time in my early 60s or late 50s, and like giving yourself permission to do that with the context of like, I mean, you're going to be spending here a little bit anyway. Like, you need to get more comfortable in that space. I don't know. I thought that was a really clever idea.
I loved it too. And Jamie's point was that working longer is actually the greater good in that situation. Like if taking those great vacations makes you able to work longer, forget the catch-up contributions, right? Go ahead and take that great vacation. Yes. So those things work together. But I love that practice spending point. My husband and I actually tried that recently because he bought a car.
Oh, yeah?
And then we were sitting down in the dealer and they're like, do you want to finance the car? And 5% interest rate. We're like, no.
Right.
We're buying a car. And so it was kind of nice. I mean, it's not great to have to, go into your portfolio, but we had the funds, and that practice spending, I think, is a really useful concept.
I think it's really useful. And I would say that this book, to our financial planner friends and insurance agent friends listening to our podcast today, like how to retire is so important to read in practice, because I think it opens your eyes to the non-time value of money part of retirement, right? The time value money part of retirement, we can teach in an undergraduate classroom. We can put together an Excel sheet, or we can use Monte Carlo tool. We can do that. We can teach someone who's 22 how to do that. But it's just the tip of this huge iceberg around life and what's next, and a scary transition, and healthcare and housing and friends. And I don't know, I thought the way the weaved path in how to retire is so important for people to understand before they just kind of sit down and have this mathy tax allocation conversation with somebody.
It's not just math.
It's not at all.
Yeah.
And so that, I don't know, I found that very warm, and I would recommend this book to new practitioners, older practitioners. And I think there's also a consumer retiree piece. I know,
hope so.
Like, if I was 10 years older, right, I'd be reading that.
Good.
Like, where are we at? Like,
I'm glad to hear that.
Spreadsheet's still short, but we got this going.
Right.
But I really appreciate this book. I think it's just fantastic. So thank you so much for writing it.
Well,
and thank you for sharing.
Thank you so
about
much,
it with
Craig.
us.
It's been great talking to you.
It's been awesome.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.